Hi everyone, this is Heather Lewis from Sault College. I am a Canadian immigration consultant and I work in our international office. I'm going to speak to you today about the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program, and specifically as it relates to Sault Ste. Marie and some of the benefits which may be available to Sault College students and our graduates. It is important to note that the information contained in this presentation is current as of today, January 17th, 2020. I'll begin by speaking about the federal criteria. This is a summary. I'm going to go into each of these points in more detail. But in order to be eligible for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program, you must meet all of these requirements. And so that includes having a qualifying job offer and work experience. And there may be an exception of that work experience requirement for some international students. You must meet or exceed the minimum language requirements and educational requirements. You have to have sufficient funds to support yourself and your family as you're transitioning into living in the community. You must intend to live in Sault Ste. Marie, and you require a recommendation from the Community Recommendation Committee, and in this case that is housed within the Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation. So beginning with the federal criteria in more detail, a qualifying job offer. I have mentioned this first because it is arguably the most important point within the criteria. You need a genuine job offer in Sault Ste. Marie. This must be a full-time, and that's defined as at least minimum 30 hours per week, non-seasonal and permanent, meaning no end date, and the wage must meet or exceed the job bank minimum. This is to ensure that you would be paid a fair wage for the job that you will be doing. Your experience must demonstrate that you can perform the duties of the job which is offered, and your job offer must be at the same skill level, one above or one level below the NOC, which applies to your work experience. I'm going to explain the NOC in just a moment in more detail, but just to be clear here, so when we're looking at the skill level one above, one below, if you have a job offer at a NOC 0, your work experience should have been at a NOC 0 or A. If you have a NOC A job offer, your work experience should have been at a 0, an A, or a B. And there is one exception here that they have stipulated. If you have a NOC D job offer, it must be in the same occupation as your work experience. So not just the same level, it must be the same occupation. So NOC, or National Occupational Classification. For immigration purposes, this is how the Canadian government can clearly define jobs and different occupations and the duties that someone would do while they're performing their job. So a skill type 0 is usually a management job, and some examples they have provided are restaurant managers or mine managers. Skill level A are professional jobs. These people usually have a degree from a university, and some examples provided are doctors and dentists or architects. Skill level B are technical jobs. These usually are jobs that require a college diploma or training as an apprentice. And some examples provided are chefs and plumbers. Skill level C are intermediate jobs. Usually someone in these jobs has at least a high school diploma or some job-specific training. And examples are long-haul truck drivers and food and beverage servers. And then skill level D. These are usually labor jobs, usually requiring on-the-job training, and examples provided here are fruit pickers and cleaning staff. And again, skill level D was the requirement of having a job in the same occupation. So if you were to look on the National Occupation Classification website, this is what it would look like. So I ran a search for nurse, and you can see here that many different job titles come up, and they range between skill type 0, A, and B. So it's important to take a good look to see what your job offer is and what your work experience is so that you can clearly define what you're working with. Excuse me. So I searched nurse, and I have decided that for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to show you licensed practical nurses. This is the purple one at the bottom. So when I click on that, we get into licensed practical nurses. This is a great one to run through because we do offer practical nursing as one of our programs at Sault College. So you can see once I clicked on licensed practical nurse, you can see the title at the top and the NOC code. You can also see the lead statement as well as the main duties. And so it's really important to read this in detail. It's not sufficient just to say, well, my job title is practical nurse. The information in the lead statement, most of the main duties, and as well as any essential duties listed, they must all match what you actually do in your occupation. It's not just enough to have the same title. So continuing with our federal criteria, there is a requirement for 1 year of continuous full-time work experience in the last 3 years. And so the equivalent of full-time is 1,560 hours. This must have been in one occupation. However, you can combine full-time and part-time experience to meet the total of the number of hours required. This experience can have been gained inside or outside of Canada, and the hours must accumulate over at least a 12-month period. And so if someone worked very hard and they earned the 1,560 hours in less than a 12-month period, it's still not sufficient. You must have worked over a 12-month period. On the flip side of that, if someone didn't quite earn those hours in a 12-month period, if it was a 13 or 14-month period before you reached the 1,560 hours, it still does not meet this requirement. They're looking at a 12-month period of time, and you must have earned those hours over that period. The work experience must include a substantial number of those main duties listed in the NOC, which I showed you, all of the essential duties listed, activities from the lead statement of the NOC, and they have noted now that work experience acquired while studying is allowed so long as it is within the authorized limits, which are stipulated on the study permit. And it is also important to note that unpaid hours and self-employed hours do not count toward these hours here. And any hours which have been earned in Canada must have been done with proper authorization to work in Canada. Great news for some of our international grads. So it's possible that international students could be exempt from the work experience criteria. So if a student has a credential, which here is a degree, a diploma, or a certificate, which is from a program which is 2 years or longer in duration, they must have studied full-time for the duration of that program. They must have graduated within 18 months of applying for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, and they must have been in Sault Ste. Marie for 16 of the last 24 months spent studying in order to earn that credential. And so just to be very clear, because I get questions from students a lot about this, I'll be asked, I have a 1-year program, am I eligible? Or many students will take a 1-year program and then take another, what we often call a 1+1, and they want to understand if they're still eligible for this pilot program. So yes, you could still be eligible to qualify to apply through this pilot program. However, you are not exempt from the requirement of work experience. So if you have studied a 1-year credential, or if you have taken a 1+1 in order to study for 2 years, you will still require that 1 year of work experience in order to qualify for the pilot program. And so there are minimum requirements for language as well as education. For language, it is tied to the NOC for your job offer. So if you have a NOC 0 or NOC A job offer, you require a CLB, that's Canadian Language Benchmark, of 6, or NCLC, this stands for Niveau de Compétence Linguistique Canadienne. It is the French name, but it still requires a 6. If you have a NOC B job offer, you need a CLB 5, and for NOC C and D, this would require a 4. Proof of this is required in the form of results from a designated language test, and these results must be less than 2 years old. On the education side, a Canadian high school diploma or in a credential assessment report showing an equivalent to Canadian high school is required, and this report, if you're providing a report, must be less than 5 years old. The requirement to show that you can support yourself and your family while settling in Sault Ste. Marie is also here within the federal criteria, unless you're already working in Canada on a valid work permit. So if you're already working in Canada legally, then you shouldn't have to demonstrate this. However, everyone else will need to show that they can support themselves and their family members. This money cannot be borrowed. It must be accessible to you to support yourself. And it is tied to the size of family, and that can include those who are not coming. So family here will be defined as the primary applicant. That could be you. And then the spouse or common law partner of that applicant, and any dependent children that you may have with your spouse or common law partner. Proof of this could be bank account statements, proof of property ownership or other investments, or documents which are guaranteeing payment of a set amount of money which is payable to you. So examples could be bank drafts, checks, or money orders which are payable to you. Wrapping up the federal criteria, you must intend to live in Sault Ste. Marie, and you require a recommendation from the recommendation committee in Sault Ste. Marie. And so I'll be getting into the community-specific criteria, which is how you would end up getting that recommendation. So within Sault Ste. Marie, they have opted to use a points-based system. This is a summary page. I'll go into each of these points in more detail. There are a few important things to note here. Each of these areas is an area where you could potentially earn points in this system. This point system is specific to the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot in Sault Ste. Marie. This is not the same as the CRS score and express entry or any other points-based system related to immigration. This is specific to Sault Ste. Marie. And so the community of Sault Ste. Marie is looking for a total score of at least 70 in order to be considered for a recommendation. And so now we'll get into each of these points. So I have mentioned before that I believe a job offer is the most important criteria. The community is really echoing this here. Nothing really moves without this job offer, and they're demonstrating this with the points allotted, and they're focusing really on some specific NOC areas to ensure we're addressing the economic needs in the community. So if you have a job offer in one of these priority NOC groups, and they're specifying it must be in one of these groups, they may consider the occasional application outside of these groups, but that's at the discretion of the committee, and they're really focusing on these groups right now. So if you have a job offer, full-time permanent, in one of these priority NOC groups, that is 55 points, 55 of the 70 minimum required in order to be considered. So that is a very large focus here. The employer eligibility is a consideration when looking at this job offer. So you need a job offer and it must be from an eligible employer. So there are a few things that the employer in Sault Ste. Marie must do in order to qualify. They have to be located within the boundaries of Sault Ste. Marie, and they must have been in active business in Sault Ste. Marie for at least 3 years. There are some caveats, so if there's an employer that's the product of a new investment, they'll have to submit a detailed business case demonstrating their activities in Sault Ste. Marie. They will need to provide detailed information on their labor needs, and they cannot have any outstanding orders against them under the Ontario Employment Standards Act or the Occupational Health and Safety Act. They are required to have at least 3 full-time employees who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents who work at the location where you will work. And they cannot be in violation of the Immigration, Refugee, and Protection Act or its regulations. And so they're going to also have to demonstrate in some capacity that they're ready to welcome and accommodate foreign workers into their workplace. There are a number of different steps they could take in order to meet this requirement. Those are outlined on the Welcome to SSM website. So moving on with the community criteria, your age on the day the application is received is a factor, and so there are different levels of points depending on your age. It's important to note that if you are applying in the future, consider your age at the time your application will be received. Your work experience in one of those priority NOC groups that I showed could be considered, and there's a range of points depending on how long you have worked. And there is a bonus here for applicants who have at least 1 year of continuous full-time work experience in Sault Ste. Marie within the past 5 years. And so if you have been working full-time continuously in Sault Ste. Marie for 2 years, you get those 2 points plus the bonus of 8 points because you've done full-time continuous work in Sault Ste. Marie for a total of 10 points in that area. Good news for Sault College grads, studying in Sault Ste. Marie is also considered within the scoring, and there are points available. So if you have studied for at least 1 year in the past 5 years, there are points available, and then 2 years or longer, you get even more points. This is another area that I consider to be a great bonus for Sault College students and grads. If you are a resident of the community, there are points available. So if you own property within the boundaries of Sault Ste. Marie and their ministerial guidelines based on those boundaries, if you own property in that area and you live in it at the time of application, you can get points. And for those who don't own property, but if you're leasing property within Sault Ste. Marie and you live in it at the time of application, there are also points available. And so to be very clear here, it's not sufficient to own property and live somewhere else. They're really specifying you must be living here. They're looking for ties to the community. And proof required for ownership or for lease will be, mortgage statements, a bank letter, or in the case of a lease agreement. They're also looking to see your ties to the community, your ties to Sault Ste. Marie. So if you have personal ties to established members of the community, there are points available. So if you have an immediate family member, here that's defined as a parent, sibling, or child, who is a permanent resident or Canadian citizen that has been in Sault Ste. Marie for a minimum of 1 year, there are 10 points available. Or if you have an extended family member, and they're defining this as a grandparent, uncle, aunt, cousin, niece, or nephew, or a friend, or a representative of an established community organization who is a Canadian permanent resident or citizen that has been living in Sault Ste. Marie for at least a year, there are also 5 points available. So proof of this relationship is going to be demonstrated through a letter of support. You can only submit 1 letter per application. And just further defining, so that established community organization, that could be potentially if you're involved in a faith community in Sault Ste. Marie, if you're involved in some specific clubs, activities in Sault Ste. Marie, having a letter as a result of that showing that you're active in the community can help to earn you points in this case. For those who have never lived in Sault Ste. Marie before applying, you could still earn some points here. So if you can demonstrate that you have visited Sault Ste. Marie for at least 5 nights within the past 3 years, and that you have met with at least 2 employers in your line of work during those visits. Also, if you can demonstrate an authentic knowledge and interest in the recreation or lifestyle, the culture of Sault Ste. Marie, then there are also points available. And so in the case of that visit, they're going to want to demonstrate proof. You're going to have hotel receipts. They're going to want the contact information for the employers you met with to ensure that you have in fact earned those points. And for those with a spouse or a common law partner, if your spouse or partner has a valid job offer in one of those priority NOC groups, there are points available. Or if your spouse or common law partner has at least 2 years of work experience, and that must have been full-time and continuous, within one of those priority NOC groups, there are also points available. And then wrapping up there are also points available based on your spouse or partner's English or French language skills. So they would have to exceed a CLB of 5 in all categories. And again, you're going to need to have designated language test results in order to demonstrate this, and those must be less than 2 years old. And so just take a little tally of your total. Just to be clear, this is a chart I made which shows the maximum points available in each category. This is not a total score overall that is achievable because there are some categories that are specific to people who live here in Sault Ste. Marie, and there are some which are for people who have never lived here. This is just to help you summarize and take a look at the total maximum available points and see what your points are. And so if you have at least 70 points, and again, need to check and make sure that you meet the federal eligibility requirements and also take a look at the admissibility requirements, then you can download and complete an application form for the Rural Northern Immigration Pilot, and you can submit it on the Welcome to SSM website. They will then ask you for supporting documents. So if you have said and you've calculated for yourself that you have a score of 75, you will need to demonstrate and support and provide supporting documents which will prove you do have that score. The applications will be reviewed by the Community Recommendation Committee. They will be meeting monthly, and they will be looking at applications which have at least that minimum score of 70 points. And if you're selected, you'll be given a nomination letter, and at that point you will then apply for permanent residence to the federal government. And so if you're looking for more information, some more specifics, I really strongly recommend that you take a look at the federal criteria and eligibility requirements. There is also a federal application guide that goes into some very specific details about the eligibility and also about how to file your applications. And also take a look at the Sault Ste. Marie website, that's the Welcome to SSM website, for more details on the community criteria as well as links to the federal websites. And if you have any more questions about Sault College and how you might be able to study with us, we would love to help answer your questions. And so please visit saultcollege.ca. You could take a virtual tour of our website while you're there and take a look at information on our various programs. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at international@saultcollege.ca. Thank you for your time and for listening. And I hope that I have made some things a little bit more clear for you. And I hope that I can provide some more information to you again in the future. Thank you.